By late afternoon on July the 20th, 1402, on a scorched plain northeast of Ankara, roughly 25,000 soldiers simply walked across the battlefield and joined the enemy. Not captured, not routed. They saw their old banners flying in the opposing ranks, and they chose. In a single afternoon, the Ottoman Empire, the most feared military power in the Western world, ceased to function. Its sultan, Bayezid I, the man they called the Thunderbolt, became the only Ottoman sovereign ever taken prisoner. He would be dead within 8 months. And the man who engineered this catastrophe, the 70-year-old Turco-Mongol conqueror Timur, had not won this battle with superior force alone. He had won it weeks earlier, with a forced march to a stream called the Chubuk, and with years of patient work cultivating the loyalties that Bayezid believed he had already conquered. The question this film exists to answer is not simply what happened at Ankara. It is how one commander turned another man's empire into a weapon against itself. This is the complete reconstruction. Not the famous moment alone, not the legend of an iron cage, but the full collision from its origins to its last consequence. We will begin years before the battle, when 2 conquerors were building empires across the same world, each absorbing the same Anatolian territories, each sheltering the other's enemies, exchanging letters that grew from diplomatic to insulting to irreconcilable. We will examine 2 war machines in forensic detail. The Ottoman system, 85,000 strong, built on Janissary infantry, Sipahi cavalry, Serbian heavy knights, and the forced levies of conquered Anatolian beyliks whose loyalty had never been tested under true pressure, and Timur's army, 140,000 veterans of Delhi, Damascus, and Baghdad, reinforced by something more dangerous than elephants or armored cavalry. The exiled princes of every beylik Bayezid had swallowed, each one carrying his old banner and his people's memory of independence. We will follow the campaign as Timur executed one of the great strategic maneuvers of the medieval world, bypassing Bayezid's prepared position, swinging north to seize the Ottoman water supply, and forcing the Thunderbolt to turn and fight on ground he had not chosen, after an exhausting counter-march through July heat with an army already thirsty and fractured by doubt. We will stand in both war councils on the night before battle, where Timur's agents were already working the Anatolian contingents, while Bayezid's janissaries sharpened their weapons in silence. We will deploy with both armies at dawn and follow the battle phase by phase, the opening cavalry clashes, the probing attacks, the moment when men on the Ottoman left began staring at familiar standards across the field, the mass defection that dissolved an entire wing, the extraordinary last stand of the Janissaries and Stefan Lazarevich's Serbian knights, fighting with desperate courage inside a perimeter that shrank by the hour. And the final scene, Bayezid surrounded, captured, his empire broken. Then we follow the aftermath. Timur's sack of Bursa, the restoration of the Anatolian beyliks, Bayezid's death in captivity, and the growth of the Iron Cage legend, which contemporary witnesses like the Spanish ambassador Clavijo contradict with accounts of respectful treatment, a decade of civil war among Bayezid's sons, and the improbable resurrection, because the empire Timur shattered at Ankara would rebuild itself, more centralized and more dangerous than before, and 51 years later, it would take the city Bayezid had been besieging when Timur's invasion forced him east, Constantinople itself. What makes Ankara extraordinary is not merely its scale. It is the question it forces us to confront. Can an empire built on compulsion survive the moment when the men it compelled are given a choice? Bayezid had absorbed the Anatolian beyliks by force and demanded obedience. Timur weaponized their memory. He carried their banners into battle like psychological artillery. And when those banners appeared across the field, 25,000 men answered a loyalty older than the Ottoman state. The truth of Ankara is more unsettling and more instructive than any legend about iron cages. It is a story about what holds an army together and what tears one apart in a single afternoon. If you value complete reconstructions of the battles that shaped civilizations, subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Each time, we take one legendary clash and rebuild it from the first diplomatic insult to the last consequence, the strategy, the commanders, the single decisions that redrew the map of the world. Now let us begin where this collision truly started, years before the armies marched, in two capitals that were growing too powerful to share the same world. In the second half of the 14th century, two men are building empires at opposite ends of the Islamic world, and neither yet knows that the other's ambition will become the defining obstacle of his reign. In the West, the Ottoman enterprise is barely a century old. What began as a small frontier principality in northwestern Anatolia has swallowed Byzantine provinces, crossed the Dardanelles, and planted itself deep in the Balkans. By 1389, the young Prince Bayezid inherits the Sultanate on the field of Kosovo, where his father Murad falls in the fighting against a Serbian-led coalition. Bayezid moves with a speed that earns him the name Yildirim, the Thunderbolt. Within a decade, he absorbs the Anatolian beyliks one by one. Germiyan, Saruhan, Aydin, Menteşe, Hamid, and the powerful Karamanids. Their ruling families are dispossessed, their armies folded into Ottoman service, their banners stored or discarded. By 1396, Bayezid commands a military machine stretching from the Danube to the Euphrates. That September, at Nicopolis on the Bulgarian bank of the Danube, he annihilates the largest crusader army assembled in a generation, French, Burgundian, Hungarian, Hospitaller knights shattered by disciplined Ottoman infantry and cavalry acting in concert. Europe recoils. Bayezid turns his attention to Constantinople itself, tightening a blockade around the ancient city, whose walls have held for 1,000 years. 3,000 miles to the east, another conqueror has been climbing since the 1360s. Timur, born near Samarkand around 1336 into the Barlas clan of Turkicized Mongol heritage, spends 2 decades fighting his way to supremacy over Transoxiana. He claims no royal lineage of his own. He rules through puppet khans of Genghisid descent while holding the title of Amir. But the modesty of the title conceals the scale of the enterprise. By 1390, Timur has crushed Persia. By 1398, his cavalry storms into northern India and sacks Delhi with a devastation the subcontinent will remember for centuries. By 1400, he has taken Aleppo and Damascus, dismantling the Mamluk frontier. Baghdad falls to him a second time. His empire stretches from the Ganges to the Mediterranean shore, held together not by institutions, but by the personal terror and strategic genius of one man, and the loyalty of an army that has never known defeat. Now the geometry closes. The Anatolian beyliks Bayezid swallowed were not merely Ottoman subjects. Several had maintained diplomatic ties with Timur. Their dispossessed princes flee eastward, appearing at Timur's court in Samarkand, begging restoration. Timur shelters them. Bayezid, in turn, harbors Ahmad Jalayir and Kara Yusuf, Enemies Timur has driven from Baghdad and Azerbaijan. Each sovereign is housing the other's fugitives, and both understand the insult. Letters pass between Bursa and Samarkand. The chronicler Ibn Arab Shah records their escalating contempt. Bayezid reportedly warns Timur to stay east of the Euphrates. Timur questions the Ottoman sultan's lineage and his right to rule. The language grows coarser with each embassy. Whether every phrase is historical or embellished by later writers, the diplomatic trajectory is unmistakable. Two universal sovereigns, each claiming supremacy over the same Turkmen and Islamic world, each sheltering the other's enemies, each too proud and too powerful to yield. By 1399, Timur has reduced every rival between Samarkand and the Mediterranean. Only one power remains unbroken on his western horizon, and Bayezid, flushed with the triumph of Nicopolis, besieging the greatest Christian city on earth, sees no reason to bow to a steppe-lord, however fearsome. Neither man can retreat without diminishing the sovereignty on which his empire depends. The collision is no longer a question of whether, but of when and where. Somewhere in the highlands of Anatolia, on ground neither has yet chosen, the two largest military forces of the age will meet. And buried inside Bayezid's magnificent army, invisible to everyone except perhaps Timur himself, a fault line runs through every regiment raised from conquered Anatolian soil, men serving an empire that erased their lords, facing an enemy who promises to restore them. The machine that Bayezid commands by the turn of the 15th century is unlike anything the Islamic or Christian world has faced. It is not a tribal confederation held together by charisma, nor a feudal levy summoned by obligation and dismissed by season. It is a permanent, layered, centralized engine of conquest, and understanding its architecture is essential to understanding why it will shatter on a single afternoon outside Ankara. At its core stand the Janissaries, the Capiculu infantry, slaves of the gate. Recruited through the Devshirme, the child levy from Christian Balkan populations, these boys are converted, trained from youth in archery, close combat, and absolute obedience to the Sultan alone. By 1400, the core numbers perhaps 5,000 to 10,000 men. They are salaried, quartered in barracks, forbidden to marry during active service, and bound to no family, no province, no loyalty except the throne. In an age when most infantry is despised, the Janissaries are an elite, disciplined, drilled, capable of holding ground against heavy cavalry charges that would scatter any feudal militia. They are the anvil of the Ottoman battle line. Around this core rides the Sipahi cavalry of the Porte, the Sultan's household horsemen, also Capiculu troops, equipped with composite bows, lances, and mail. They are the mobile reserve, the counterpunch held back until the decisive moment. But the bulk of the army, the tens of thousands who fill the flanks and give the Ottoman line its breadth, are Timar cavalry, provincial horsemen granted land revenues in exchange for military service. Each Sipahi of the provinces must appear when summoned, armed and mounted, often bringing additional retainers proportional to his income. This system, inherited from Seljuk and Byzantine precedent, binds land to war. It is efficient, self-financing, and scalable. By 1399, the Timar system stretches across Thrace, Macedonia, Bulgaria, and deep into Anatolia. And here the fracture hides. In the Balkans, the system has had decades to root. In Anatolia, it has been imposed within living memory, often within the last 10 years, over territories that were independent beyliks a generation ago. Germian, Saruhan, Aydin, Menteşe, Hamid, Karaman. Each was a sovereign emirate with its own dynasty, its own army, its own identity. Bayezid absorbed them through a mixture of marriage alliance, purchase, and outright conquest between 1389 and 1397. Their former lords were dispossessed, exiled, or killed. Their cavalrymen were folded into the Ottoman Timar system and expected to ride under Ottoman banners as though their old world had never existed. On the right wing of Bayezid's order of battle stands a force of a different character entirely. The Serbian heavy cavalry under despot Stefan Lazarević, vassal to the Sultan since Kosovo in 1389. These are armored lancers in the Western European tradition, perhaps 5,000 to 6,000 strong, and their loyalty is personal, tested, and genuine. Stefan owes his throne to Ottoman support. He will fight. Altogether, the army Bayezid can field numbers roughly 85,000, though sources vary. It is a formidable instrument, Janissary discipline at center, Serbian shock power on one flank, massed Timar cavalry filling the line. It has never lost a major pitched battle. Yet the machine contains a paradox that Bayezid either cannot see or chooses to ignore. The Anatolian Timariots serve because they must, not because they belong. Their old emirs are alive, in exile, sending messages, making promises. The system demands their bodies on the field. It has not yet earned their hearts. And somewhere east of the Euphrates, a commander who has spent 40 years studying exactly this kind of fracture is preparing to test whether compelled obedience holds when the alternative stands in plain sight under familiar banners offering restoration. The siege lines around Constantinople still hold as 1400 turns to 1401, and Bayezid's gaze remains fixed on the ancient city's walls, confident in the machine he has built, unaware that its most dangerous weakness is not a gap in the line, but a question in the minds of 25,000 men who remember different flags. That commander is Timur, born around 1336 near the city of Kesh in Transoxiana, and by the year 1400 he has spent more than 3 decades perfecting a single art, the destruction of an enemy's will to fight before the first arrow flies. His empire stretches from the Ganges to the Euphrates, from the Aral Sea to the Persian Gulf, and every mile of it was taken by an army that later chroniclers and modern historians alike regard as the most sophisticated military instrument of the medieval world. The foundation is the steppe cavalry tradition inherited from the Mongol Empire, but Timur has refined it beyond recognition. His tumans, divisions of 10,000 oghuz, are organized in the decimal system Genghis Khan established, yet they operate with a flexibility that no Mongol army ever achieved. Each tumen contains heavy lancers in lamellar armor, light horse archers carrying composite bows with an effective range of 200 paces, and screening units trained to feign retreat across miles of open ground, drawing pursuers into prepared killing zones. The army drills constantly. Timur conducts enormous hunts across the Central Asian steppe that function as full-scale military exercises, with tens of thousands of riders executing encirclements, signal flag maneuvers, and coordinated charges over terrain they have never seen before. But cavalry alone does not explain the sieges of Delhi, Damascus, and Baghdad. Timur employs a corps of engineers drawn from every conquered civilization: Persian sappers, Chinese pyrotechnicians, Arab siege architects. They build trebuchets on campaign from local timber, dig approach trenches that would not look unfamiliar to a 15th century European besieger, and construct pontoon bridges capable of crossing the Tigris in hours. At Smyrna, still 2 years in the future, they will reduce Hospitaller fortifications in 2 weeks. War elephants captured in India march with the baggage train, their psychological impact on armies that have never faced them calculated as precisely as any flanking maneuver. Yet Timur's most devastating weapon is intelligence. His network of agents, merchants, and sympathizers operates months ahead of his armies. Before he fights, he knows the internal fractures of every state he approaches, which governors resent their sultan, which tribes serve under compulsion, which exiled princes dream of restoration. He collects these princes, he feeds them, arms their retinues, and promises them their thrones. They become walking proof that submission to Timur means survival, and that resistance means annihilation. By 1401, several of these exiled figures are Anatolian Beylik lords dispossessed by Bayezid, the emirs of Aydin, Germiyan, Menteche, Saruhan, and others. They sit in Timur's camp with their households, their old battle standards carefully preserved. Timur has studied the Ottoman army with the patience of a surgeon examining a body before the incision. He knows that Bayezid's Anatolian levies serve a throne that extinguished their sovereigns barely a decade ago. He knows that loyalty measured in years, not generations, is loyalty that can be broken. The army he assembles for the Anatolian campaign numbers roughly 140,000, though sources range from 100 to 200,000. What matters more than the total is its depth, reserve lines stacked behind the front, fresh units ready to rotate forward, a command structure that allows Timur to shift forces across a battlefield miles wide without losing cohesion. His sons and grandsons command the wings, each tested in independent campaigns across India and the Caucasus. Samarkand gleams behind him, its mosques and madrasas built with craftsmen deported from every sacked city, its gardens watered by Persian engineers, its treasury heavy with the wealth of 20 kingdoms. It is the capital of a conqueror who has never lost a pitched battle. And now his gaze turns west, toward an empire whose sultan believes himself invincible, whose army contains within it the very men Timur has spent years preparing to reclaim. The Beylik banners are packed with the baggage. The agents are already moving through Anatolia, carrying messages to men who remember different sovereigns. Spring is coming, and with it 140,000 veterans begin the long march toward the Anatolian plateau. Those messages find willing ears because the men who receive them have lost everything. Across western and central Anatolia, a constellation of Turkmen principalities had governed for generations, small states born from the collapse of Seljuk authority, each with its own dynasty, its own court poets, its own hilltop fortress, its own memory of sovereignty. Germiyan, centered on Kütahya, had ruled its valleys since the late 13th century. Saruhan held the fertile lands around Manisa. Aydin controlled the Aegean coast from its stronghold at Birgi. Menteche governed the southwestern shores, and Karaman, the largest and most defiant, claimed nothing less than succession to the Seljuk Sultanate itself, ruling from Konya and Larende across a vast stretch of south-central Anatolia. Bayezid consumed them all within a single decade. His methods varied. Marriage alliance with Germiyan in 1381 brought its lands as dowry, though the dynasty's autonomy vanished within years. Saruhan and Aden fell to direct military campaigns in 1389 and 1390. Menteşe followed shortly after. Karaman resisted longest, fighting 2 wars before Bayezid crushed its army and annexed its territories by 1397. In each case the pattern repeated. The ruling family was dispossessed, its lands absorbed into the Ottoman Timar system, its soldiers conscripted into provincial levies, now answering to Ottoman-appointed commanders. The old banners were furled, the old courts dissolved. But the old lords did not all die. Some accepted comfortable captivity in Bursa. Others fled east beyond Ottoman reach, carrying with them the one thing Bayezid could not confiscate: legitimacy in the eyes of their former subjects. By the late 1390s, a remarkable gathering had formed at Timur's court and among his subordinate camps. Yakub of Germian, princes of the Aden and Menteşe houses, members of the Saruhan dynasty, and most significantly, claimants to the Karamanid throne, all found shelter under Timur's protection. They were not charity cases. They were strategic instruments, and Timur treated them accordingly, maintaining their households, confirming their titles, and keeping them visible. The calculation was precise. Every Anatolian soldier conscripted into Bayezid's army still knew which beylik his grandfather had served. The Timar grants that bound these men to Ottoman service were barely a decade old. Their villages still told stories of the old emirs. Their families still used the old names. Loyalty to Bursa was administrative, enforced by tax rolls and military obligation. Loyalty to the old dynasties was personal, rooted in generations of patronage and shared identity. Timur understood that an army held together by compulsion could be unmade by offering its soldiers something compulsion could never provide: the sight of their rightful lords, alive, armed, and riding under their ancestral standards. Throughout the late 1390s, agents carrying messages from these exiled princes filtered back into Anatolia. The chronicles of Ibn Arab-Shah and the Ottoman historian Neshri both record that Timur's intelligence network operated extensively in the former beylik territories, making contact with local notables, former military commanders, and garrison soldiers who now wore Ottoman colors but had not forgotten older allegiances. The content of these messages was simple and devastating. Your prince lives, your banner survives, and when the great army comes, you will have a choice. By 1400, the exiled princes had become something more dangerous than refugees. They were living proof that Bayezid's conquest was reversible. Each one represented a crack in the Ottoman army that no amount of drilling or discipline could seal, because the fracture ran not through training or equipment, but through identity itself. When Timur's quartermasters packed those beylik banners into the baggage train, they were loading weapons as potent as any siege engine, weapons designed not to break walls, but to break an army's will to fight as one. The men who would carry those banners westward into Anatolia had waited years for this march, and the soldiers they aimed to reclaim had never been asked whether they wished to be Ottoman at all. That march begins in the spring of 1402, when Timur's columns cross the upper Euphrates and enter Anatolia in force. The army numbers roughly 140,000 men, stretching across miles of mountain road, its vanguard already deep into Ottoman territory before the rearguard has cleared the river crossings. With it travel the exiled beylik princes, their households, their retainers, and those carefully packed banners, instruments of fracture carried westward like siege towers meant for a different kind of wall. Timur's first objective is Sivas, a fortified city in east-central Anatolia that serves as one of the Ottoman Empire's most important eastern strongholds. The city is garrisoned and walled, but it cannot withstand the full weight of a Timurid siege. Timur's engineers have perfected their craft across decades of reducing cities from Delhi to Damascus, and Sivas receives the same methodical treatment: encirclement, mining, bombardment. The garrison resists, but the outcome is never in doubt. The city falls, and Timur's treatment of it sends a calculated message across Anatolia. The destruction is severe enough to announce that resistance carries unbearable cost, yet selective enough to suggest that submission offers survival. Every Beylik lord still wavering in Ottoman service hears the news and understands the arithmetic. The fall of Sivas accomplishes something Timur values more than any fortress. It forces Bayezid to move. The Ottoman Sultan has spent years tightening the noose around Constantinople, maintaining siege lines that slowly starve the Byzantine capital. Those lines represent an enormous investment of men, material, and strategic patience. Constantinople is the prize that would crown Bayezid's reign, the conquest that would place him above every sultan before him. And now he must abandon it. Bayezid lifts the siege and turns his army eastward. The decision is not a choice, but a compulsion. Timur is not raiding a frontier province. He is dismantling the Ottoman East, and every week of inaction allows the Timurid army to advance deeper, recruit more defectors, and restore more Beyliks to independence. Bayezid understands speed. He has built his reputation on it, the nickname Thunderbolt earned through campaigns that moved faster than any enemy expected. Now he drives his army across Anatolia in the summer heat, covering distances that test the endurance of even his best troops. The march east gathers forces as it goes. Bayezid summons his Anatolian contingents, the very men whose loyalty is most uncertain, because he cannot afford to leave them behind where Timur's agents might reach them, and he cannot afford to fight without their numbers. He calls upon Stefan Lazarevich and the Serbian heavy cavalry, vassals bound by treaty and proven at Nicopolis. He pulls janissaries from garrison duty. By the time the Ottoman army is fully assembled, it numbers perhaps 85,000 or a formidable force, but already outnumbered, and carrying within its ranks the seeds of its own dissolution. Behind Bayezid, Constantinople's walls stand unbreached. The Byzantine Emperor Manuel II, who has spent years desperately seeking Western aid against the Ottoman siege, watches the army that nearly strangled his capital march away toward a collision he can scarcely believe. The siege lines empty, the pressure lifts, the city breathes. Ahead of Bayezid, Timur is not standing still. His scouts track the Ottoman advance, his agents continue working the Anatolian troops, and his strategists are already studying the terrain around Ankara, searching for the ground where geography, water, and exhaustion can be turned into weapons more decisive than any cavalry charge. The two largest armies in the world are now converging across the same parched landscape, and the distance between them shrinks with every passing day. The distance closes through June and into the furnace of July, and it is Timur who dictates the geometry of the convergence. Bayezid has positioned his army near Ankara, the central Anatolian fortress city that commands the roads east, and he expects the Timurid host to approach from the southeast along the most direct route from Sivas. It is a reasonable expectation. It is also exactly what Timur wants him to believe. Timur's scouts have mapped every stream, every ridge, every well between Sivas and Ankara. His intelligence network, built across decades of continental campaigning, feeds him information that Bayezid cannot match. And sometime in the first weeks of July, Timur executes one of the most audacious operational maneuvers of the medieval world. Rather than advancing directly toward the Ottoman position, he swings his entire army, 140,000 men, their baggage, their elephants, their herds, northward in a wide arc, crossing difficult terrain that no commander would choose unless he intended to arrive where he was not expected. The march covers roughly 150 kilometers through summer heat, and it brings Timur not to the front of Bayezid's position, but behind it. The target is water. Northeast of Ankara, the Chubuk stream flows through a shallow valley, and this modest watercourse is the primary supply for the Ottoman camp. Timur seizes it. His engineers reportedly dam or divert portions of the flow. When Bayezid's scouts report what has happened, the strategic picture inverts completely. The Ottoman army, already stressed by weeks of hard marching from the west in July, temperatures that turn the Anatolian plateau into a kiln, now finds its water supply in enemy hands and a hostile army between it and the city it was meant to defend. Bayezid faces the defining decision of the campaign. He can withdraw westward, stretching his supply lines but preserving his army, forcing Timur to follow and perhaps overextend. He can attempt to maneuver around the Timurid position and find new water sources, or he can turn and attack, accepting battle on ground that Timur has chosen, with troops who have marched hard and drunk little. His commanders reportedly urge caution. The Anatolian levies are exhausted. The Sipahi horses need rest and water. Every hour of delay deepens the thirst. Bayezid chooses to fight. The sources do not record his exact reasoning, but the logic of his character and his situation can be reconstructed. He has never retreated. His epithet, the Thunderbolt, was earned through speed and aggression, not through patience. Withdrawal risks the disintegration of an army already held together partly by momentum and fear. The Anatolian contingents, whose loyalty is the thinnest thread in his war machine, might interpret retreat as weakness and begin melting away. And Timur's army, if left unmolested, will only grow stronger as more defectors and local allies join it. So the Ottoman army countermarches. Tens of thousands of men turn in the July heat and trudge toward the plain northeast of Ankara, where Timur waits, rested, watered, and deployed on ground he has studied for days. The troops arrive parched. The horses are spent. The Janissaries, the hard professional corps, maintain their discipline, but the broader army is a machine running on fumes. Stefan Lazarevich's Serbian knights, heavy cavalry accustomed to European campaigning, endure the heat in their armor with grim resolve. Across the Chubuk Valley, Timur's camp stretches wide. His formations have had time to rest, to water their horses, to position reserves in depth, and along his front line, planted deliberately where the Ottoman Anatolian troops cannot miss them, stand the banners of the lost beyliks, Germian, Aydin, Saruhan, Menteşe, carried by the exiled princes who now ride as Timur's allies. The banners are not decoration. They are the final weapon in a campaign that was won before the first arrow flies. The men on Bayezid's left flank will march into battle, staring at the standards of the lords they once served, carried by an army that offers them the one thing Bayezid never could, the restoration of everything he took from them. Night falls on the 19th of July, 1402. Both armies settle onto the plain. campfires stretch to the horizon in every direction. Somewhere in the Ottoman camp, waterskins are passed and found light. The campfires burn in two great constellations across the Anatolian plateau, separated by perhaps 4,000 paces of dry grass and broken ground. The night of the 19th of July, 1402, is warm and still, and the air carries the smell of dust, horse sweat, and the faint sweetness of dried dung fuel. Somewhere between 80 and 90,000 men lie on the Ottoman side. Across the darkness, nearly twice that number rest under Timur's standards. Neither army will sleep well. In the Ottoman camp, the Janissaries go about their rituals with the discipline of men who have done this before Nicopolis, before Kosovo, before every siege and field engagement that built Bayezid's reputation. Weapons are inspected by torchlight. Bowstrings are tested for tension. The great copper cooking pots of the order units sit over low fires, and the men eat together as they always do, their mess structure doubling as their chain of command. These are professionals, perhaps 10,000 strong, and they know what dawn will ask of them. Their confidence is real. They have never been broken in open battle. On the Ottoman right, Stefan Lazarevich's Serbian contingent occupies its own section of the camp. These are heavy cavalry armored knights whose equipment and tactics belong more to the battlefields of Central Europe than to the steppe. Lazarevich himself is perhaps 35 years old, a vassal bound to Bayezid by oath and political necessity since his father's death at Kosovo in 1389. His loyalty is personal and tested. The Serbs number perhaps 5,000 to 6,000, and they represent the hardest striking force in Bayezid's order of battle. It is on the Ottoman left that the knight carries a different quality. Here camp the Anatolian levies, contingents drawn from the conquered beyliks of Germian, Saruhan, Aydin, Menteşe, and others. These men number perhaps 20,000 to 25,000, and they serve under Ottoman-appointed commanders, not their hereditary lords. Many were incorporated into the Timur system only within the last decade. Their loyalty runs to land grants and local obligation, not to Bayezid personally. And tonight, across the darkened plain, men move between these contingents who should not be there. Timurid sources corroborated by later Ottoman chronicles, including Neshri, record that Timur's intelligence agents had been working the Anatolian troops for weeks. Some accounts say months. The method is not subtle. The exiled beylik princes in Timur's camp have sent kinsmen, former retainers, men who share blood and dialect with the soldiers now camped under Ottoman banners. The message they carry is simple. Your true lords are alive, they ride with Timur, and when battle comes, you may return to them. No one will punish you. Your lands will be restored. Whether Bayezid knows the full scale of this infiltration is uncertain. He is not a fool, and Ottoman commanders had reason to distrust the Anatolian contingents. But the Thunderbolt's command style leaves little room for doubt or delay. He has built his empire on the principle that absorbed peoples fight when ordered to fight. He has no mechanism for testing loyalty on the eve of battle. Only the assumption that the system holds because it has always held. Across the field, Timur's camp operates with the methodical precision of an army that has campaigned continuously for 3 decades. Units are organized in decimal structure, tens, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, each with clear command chains. The war elephants, brought from campaigns in India, are picketed at the rear, their handlers keeping them calm. Timur himself, now 65 or 66 years old, lame in the right leg from an old wound, conducts his final council. The deployment order is already decided. The Beylik banners have been distributed to their positions in the front line, visible, unmistakable. The Chubuk stream, seized during the approach march, flows behind Timur's position. His men have water. Bayezid's do not, or not enough. The Ottoman army has marched hard in July heat to reach this ground, and the wells and tributaries available to them are insufficient for 80,000 men and tens of thousands of horses. Thirst is already a factor before the first arrow is nocked. Dawn will come early on the 20th of July. The plain northeast of Ankara will fill with dust as both armies form their lines. The deployment that emerges will reveal the full architecture of what Timur has engineered, not merely a battle, but a machine designed to make an army destroy itself from within. The first light of the 20th of July 1402 touches the plain northeast of Ankara, and what it reveals is not merely two armies, but two philosophies of war arranged in living geometry across perhaps 5,000 paces of dry, undulating ground. Bayezid's line forms facing roughly east, anchored on terrain that offers no natural advantage, because there is none to be had. Timur has chosen this ground, not the Sultan. The Ottoman deployment follows the pattern that has served Bayezid from Kosovo to Nicopolis. On the right wing stand the Serbian heavy cavalry under despot Stefan Lazarevic, perhaps 5,000 armored horsemen whose equipment and discipline make them the most formidable shock force in the Ottoman order of battle. They carry lances, wear mail and plate, and fight in the Western manner, knee to knee, at the charge. Bayezid trusts them because their loyalty is personal, feudal, bound by oath and mutual survival rather than by the compulsion that holds his eastern flank together. At the center stand the Janissaries, perhaps 10,000 strong, deployed on foot behind stakes and field obstacles in the manner that shattered the French chivalry at Nicopolis 6 years earlier. These are slave soldiers raised from childhood for war, loyal to the Sultan's person alone. Around them cluster the household cavalry, the Kapikulu Sipahis, and Bayezid himself, mounted, visible, refusing to command from the rear. On the left wing, and here the architecture reveals its fracture, stand the Anatolian contingents. Troops levied from the conquered beyliks of Germian, Saruhan, Aydin, Menteşe, and others. Perhaps 20 to 25,000 men. They are capable soldiers. They are also men whose former sovereigns were dispossessed by the very Sultan they now serve, and whose beylik banners they can see, at this moment, displayed in the opposing line. Timur's deployment is wider, deeper, and designed with the patience of a man who has fought 40 years of steppe warfare. His front stretches beyond both Ottoman flanks. The center holds steady veteran cavalry. The wings curve forward in the classic nomadic envelopment formation, heavy enough to pin, mobile enough to sweep. Behind the front line, echeloned reserves stand in successive ranks. Sources suggest as many as 3 or 4 reserve lines, each capable of independent maneuver. 32 war elephants, armored and towered, anchor positions along the line where their mass and noise will disrupt enemy horses. And there, placed with calculated precision along the sectors facing the Ottoman left, fly the banners of the dispossessed beyliks. The standards of Germian, of Aydin, of Saruhan, carried not as trophies, but as invitations. The exiled princes themselves ride beneath them, visible to the men they once ruled. This is not decoration. This is the final mechanism of the weapon Timur has spent months assembling. The numerical disparity alone is severe. Timur fields roughly 140,000 against Bayezid's 85,000. But numbers tell only part of the story. Timur's men are rested, watered, positioned on ground of their choosing. Bayezid's army has completed an exhausting forced march in midsummer heat to arrive here, and the water sources available to them, a few inadequate wells and tributaries, cannot sustain 85,000 men and their horses. Soldiers who formed ranks at dawn are already thirsty. Horses that will be asked to charge by mid-morning have not drunk properly since the previous day. The chessboard is set. Timur's formation is a crescent designed to envelop. Bayezid's is a line designed to hold and strike. But the line contains within itself the instrument of its own unmaking, an entire wing composed of men whose allegiance is conditional, whose former lords stand in plain sight across 4,000 paces of dry grass, and whose thirst grows with every passing hour. The Sultan sees his janissaries, his Serbs, his household guard, and believes he commands an army. Timur sees the same formation and reads it as a problem already half solved. The dust begins to rise as the first cavalry screens move forward. The dust rises first in thin veils, kicked up by the screening horsemen who ride out ahead of both lines in the ancient steppe tradition of testing an enemy's nerve before committing weight. Timur's light cavalry, Chagatai horse archers riding small, hardy mounts bred on the grasslands east of the Oxus, fan out in loose formations across the front, loosing arrows at extreme range, wheeling away before contact, probing for weakness the way water probes a dam for cracks. They ride in disciplined groups of a few hundred, rotating forward and back in rehearsed rhythm, each wave pressing slightly closer than the last. The Ottoman Sipahis answer. On the right wing, where Stefan Lazarevich's Serbian heavy cavalry anchors the line, the response is measured and professional. The Serbs do not chase. They hold formation, absorbing the harassment, waiting for the moment when pursuit will mean something. On the Ottoman left, the Anatolian cavalry rides out to meet Timur's skirmishers, and here the engagement takes on a different character. The men of Germiyan and Saruhan and Aden are competent horsemen, many of them veterans of Bayezid's Balkan campaigns, and they drive back the first probing waves with skill. But their eyes are not fixed only on the enemy riders wheeling before them. Behind those riders, visible through the thinning dust whenever the wind shifts, stand the banners. The banners are deliberate. Timur has ordered the standards of the conquered Anatolian beyliks displayed prominently along his left wing, where they face the Ottoman contingents drawn from those same territories, the emerald banner of the Germiyanids, the standards of Aydin, of Menteşe, of Saruhan. Each one carried beside a living prince, the former lord of that land, now riding in Timur's service, visible to the men who once served him. This is not accident. This is engineering. Timur understands that loyalty is not an abstraction, but a relationship between specific men and specific symbols, and he has arranged his battle line as a message. The morning's cavalry exchanges produce no decisive result in purely military terms. Timur's horse archers inflict casualties but cannot break the Ottoman screening line. The Sipahis hold their ground but cannot catch the lighter Chagatai riders. Along the center, the Janissaries stand in their ranks, shields grounded, waiting. They are infantry in a cavalry battle's opening act, and their role will come later, when the mounted wings have spent their energy and the grinding work of holding the center falls to men on foot. But the real damage of the morning is invisible. Every hour that passes deepens the thirst that Timur's strategic masterstroke has imposed. The Chubuk stream lies behind Timur's position, and his men have drunk their fill. The Ottoman soldiers have not. In July heat on the Anatolian plateau, where temperatures climb past 40 degrees by midday, dehydration degrades a soldier faster than any arrow. Hands grip weapons less firmly. Reactions slow by fractions that accumulate into disaster. Horses that have not watered properly since the previous evening begin to falter in the dust. And on the Ottoman left, between the cavalry exchanges, something quieter is happening. Riders from Timur's Anatolian contingents are edging close enough to shout, not insults, but names. Names of villages, of commanders, of shared campaigns. The sources differ on the precise mechanism, whether formal emissaries crossed the gap, or whether the defection grew organically from recognition and exhaustion. But the effect is consistent across every account. The men on the Ottoman left are listening. They are watching those banners. They are remembering lords they served before Bayezid absorbed their lands and scattered their courts. The battle's opening hours have established a rhythm that favors Timur in every dimension. His cavalry controls the tempo. His water advantage compounds with every passing hour. His psychological operation against the Ottoman left is working not through dramatic gestures, but through the slow accumulation of doubt in thousands of thirsty men who can see their old world standing in formation across 4,000 paces of dry ground. The Janissaries remain steady. The Serbs remain unbroken. But the army is not a single organism. It is a coalition held together by one man's authority, and the seams are beginning to show. As the sun climbs toward noon, the probing cavalry withdraws, and Timur's main formations begin their advance. The advance comes not as a single wave, but as a coordinated compression, Timur's wings pressing inward while his center moves forward at a measured pace. The whole formation tightening like a hand closing around the Ottoman line. It is midday, the sun directly overhead, and the heat on the Anatolian plateau is punishing. The men on the Ottoman left have been fighting or standing in formation since dawn without adequate water, and now the pressure against them intensifies with terrible precision, because the units advancing towards them carry the banners of Germian, Saruhan, Aydin, and Menteşe. These are not abstract symbols. They are the standards under which many of these same soldiers served 5 years ago, 10 years ago, before Bayezid's campaigns of annexation folded their homelands into the Ottoman state. The exiled Beylik princes ride visibly beneath those banners, and their presence is not accidental. Timur has positioned them with surgical intent, placing each contingent opposite the Ottoman troops drawn from that same emirate. The message requires no messenger. It is written in silk and horsehair, floating above the advancing line. The defection does not happen all at once. It begins with hesitation, units on the Ottoman left slowing their response to orders, cavalry squadrons drifting wide instead of closing ranks. Then small groups begin crossing the gap between the armies, dozens at first, then hundreds, riding or walking toward the banners they once followed. Ottoman officers attempt to hold their formations, but the authority that bound these men was always conditional, rooted in Bayezid's power to compel rather than in any deeper allegiance. That power means nothing when the alternative stands 400 paces away under a familiar standard. Within perhaps an hour, the Ottoman left wing effectively ceases to exist as a fighting force. Sources differ on the numbers. Some accounts suggest as many as 25,000 men changed sides, others give lower figures. But the military consequence is beyond dispute. The entire left third of Bayezid's line has dissolved, and Timur's forces pour into the gap like water through a broken dam. The Ottoman centre, anchored by the Janissary infantry, is now exposed on its left flank. Bayezid's messengers ride desperately toward the disintegrating wing, but there is nothing to rally. The men have not fled. They have simply returned to older loyalties that Bayezid's centralization never truly extinguished. On the Ottoman right, Stefan Lazarevich and his Serbian heavy cavalry continue to fight with ferocious discipline. The Serbs have no former lords in Timur's ranks, no divided loyalty, no reason to waver. They are bound to Bayezid by vassal oath and by the practical reality that their homeland security depends on Ottoman power. Their armored charge drives back Timur's cavalry on that flank, and for a brief window the right wing holds firm. But a wing cannot win a battle when the opposite wing has vanished and the center is being enveloped. Bayezid can see the catastrophe unfolding. The Janissaries, perhaps 10,000 strong, remain in formation at the center, professional soldiers whose loyalty is institutional, forged in the Dev-Shirme system, owing everything to the Sultan and nothing to any Anatolian beylik. They do not waver. But they are now an island, the tide of Timur's cavalry flowing around both sides as the defection transforms the geometry of the battlefield from a contest between two lines into a siege of one shrinking perimeter. The engine that drove this battle, centralized compulsion against living memory, has delivered its verdict. Bayezid built his army by absorbing conquered peoples and demanding their service. Timur gave those peoples back their banners and let the army unmake itself. The island holds. Around it, the battlefield has become something closer to a whirlpool, Timur's cavalry circling the Ottoman center in tightening arcs, while the dust of 25,000 departed Anatolians settles on the western horizon. What remains of Bayezid's army is no longer an army in any operational sense. It is two formations, the Janissaries at the center and Stefan Lazarevich's Serbian heavy cavalry on the right, surrounded by a war they have already lost but have not yet stopped fighting. The Janissaries contract into the formation they know best, a dense infantry mass bristling with bows and blades, shields overlapping, officers calling cadence to hold the ranks steady. These are not men who serve because a beylik lord told them to ride. They are the Sultan's own, raised from boyhood in the Dev-Shirme system, trained in the palace schools, owing their identity and their livelihood to the Ottoman throne itself. No banner across the field calls them home, because the Janissary Corps has no home except the dynasty. Their loyalty is not a question of sentiment. It is structural. And so they stand. Stefan Lazarevich, the Serbian despot, commands perhaps 5,000 armored knights on the Ottoman right. His position is extraordinary. A Christian vassal fighting for a Muslim sultan against a Muslim conqueror, holding his ground not from compulsion, but from a personal oath of loyalty to Bayezid forged after Nicopolis. His knights are the heaviest cavalry on the field, men in full plate on barded horses, and as Timur's lighter horsemen press inward, Stefan orders a charge. The Serbian wedge drives into the Timurid left with enough force to momentarily open a corridor through the encirclement. Later, Ottoman and Serbian sources, including Konstantin Mihailovich's memoirs, record this charge as one of the most remarkable feats of the day. Heavy European cavalry smashing through steppe horse archers by sheer mass and discipline. But a corridor is not a victory. Stephen's charge buys space, not time. Timur's reserves are deep, perhaps 30,000 men who have not yet engaged, and they flow around the Serbian penetration like water around a stone. The corridor begins to close behind Stephen's knights almost as soon as it opens. At the center of the shrinking perimeter, Bayezid himself remains mounted, visible, refusing every suggestion to withdraw. The sources, Shukrullah, Neshri, and the Timurid chronicler Sharaf ad-Din Ali Yazdi, agree on this point with unusual unanimity. The Sultan, who earned the name Thunderbolt for the speed of his campaigns, will not run from this field. Whether this is courage, pride, or the cold calculation that flight would only accelerate the disintegration of what remains, the effect is the same. The Janissaries see their Sultan holding, and they hold. The perimeter contracts through the early afternoon. Timur does not order a decisive assault. He does not need to. His horse archers circle and shoot, the arrows falling in arcs that force the Janissaries to keep their shields high, while the dust and July heat do their own slow work. The Ottoman center has no water. The Chubuk stream that Timur seized days ago is behind his lines, and the men who have been marching and fighting since dawn in Anatolian summer have nothing to drink. Thirst becomes a weapon more effective than any cavalry charge. Stefan Lazarevich, recognizing that the battle is beyond recovery, makes the decision that preserves his contingent for history. He gathers his Serbian knights and cuts westward through the encirclement, fighting clear of the field in a controlled withdrawal that later sources describe as orderly and fierce. He will reach Ottoman territory, then eventually Serbia, with most of his force intact. His departure strips the last mobile striking power from Bayezid's position. What remains is the Janissary Corps, perhaps 8,000 men still in formation, ringed by an army 5 times their number. They do not break. They do not negotiate. The afternoon sun presses down on a circle of men growing smaller with each quarter hour, their ranks thinning under arrow fire, their formation contracting inward like a fist closing around nothing. Bayezid sits his horse at the center of this diminishing circle, and the plain around him belongs entirely to Timur. The circle contracts. By the middle of the afternoon, the Janissary formation has drawn inward to a perimeter perhaps 300 paces across, a compressed mass of infantry standing shoulder to shoulder on ground they have held since morning. Around them, the plain has emptied of Ottoman banners. The Anatolian left is gone, absorbed into Timur's ranks hours ago. The Serbian right has fought clear and is moving west. The Sipahi cavalry that once screened both flanks has scattered or been ridden down. What remains is the professional core of the Ottoman military state, the Sultan's household infantry, the men recruited as boys, trained in the palace schools, bound by discipline and oath to the dynasty itself. They have no flanks to anchor, no reserves to call forward, no water, and no possibility of relief. They continue to fight. Timur does not order a final massed assault. The sources Ibn Arabshah, Sharaf al-Din Ali Yazdi, and the later Ottoman chronicler Neshri agree on the method. Mounted archers circle the Janissary perimeter at distances beyond javelin range, pouring arrows into the compressed formation in rotating waves, each squadron loosing and wheeling away to be replaced by the next. It is the step method perfected across 40 years of Timur's campaigns. Patient, economical, designed to break cohesion without risking elite cavalry in close combat against desperate infantry. The Janissaries raise shields and endure. Their crossbowmen and archers answer when they can, but the geometry is fatal. A circle can be struck from every direction simultaneously. Every volley finds gaps. The formation shrinks but does not fragment. This distinction matters. A broken formation becomes a crowd, and a crowd is slaughtered. The Janissaries maintain their ranks, stepping inward over fallen companions, closing the gaps, keeping shields locked. Ottoman sources written decades later would remember this stand as proof that the Janissary institution itself had not failed, that the empire's destruction came from the treachery of compelled vassals, not from any weakness in the Sultan's own troops. The memory served political purposes, but the military reality beneath it was genuine. These men held formation long past the point where holding served any strategic purpose. Bayezid remains among them. Multiple sources confirmed that the Sultan refused opportunities to flee, though accounts differ on whether flight was ever truly possible by mid-afternoon. His horse is killed beneath him. Yazdi records this detail, and he continues on foot. The Thunderbolt, the man who had moved armies across Anatolia and the Balkans with legendary speed, is now confined to a circle of ground a man could cross in 300 heartbeats. The end comes not as a dramatic final charge, but as an inevitable compression. As the perimeter contracts below the point where organized resistance can be maintained, Timurid cavalry close in. Bayezid is taken alive, likely in the final hour before sunset. He is the first and only Ottoman sultan ever captured by an enemy. The sources closest in time to the event, the Castilian ambassador Ruy González de Clavijo, who visited Timur's court the following year, record that the conqueror treated his captive with a measure of respect, dining with him and expressing conventional regret at his condition. The iron cage enters the story later. Ibn Arab Shah, writing decades after the event and hostile to Timur, introduces the image of Bayezid displayed in a barred litter. Ottoman chronicles amplify it into a cage of iron carried before Timur's army. Clavijo, who had no reason to flatter Timur on this point, describes nothing of the kind. The cage is almost certainly legend, born from the need to make the humiliation of capture even more vivid, to transform political catastrophe into personal martyrdom. What the sources do agree on is that Bayezid did not long survive. He died in captivity in March of 1403, roughly 8 months after Ankara. Whether by illness, despair, or his own hand, the sources diverge and certainty is impossible. On the plain, the sun sets over a field where an empire has ceased to function. Timur's army holds the ground, the water, and the Sultan. The Ottoman state has no army, no treasury, no sovereign. Bayezid's sons are scattered across Anatolia and the Balkans, and each of them now believes the throne is his. The reckoning begins before the dust of battle has settled. In the days following the 20th of July, Timur's army fans out across western Anatolia with the methodical precision of a conqueror who has done this many times before. The objective is not merely to defeat the Ottoman state, but to disassemble it, to reverse the centralization that Bayezid spent a decade imposing, and to ensure that no single power in Anatolia can threaten Timur's eastern flank again. The first target is Bursa. The Ottoman capital falls within weeks, its treasury seized, its palaces stripped. Timurid sources record the plunder with satisfaction. Ottoman chronicles remember it as catastrophe. The city that housed the tombs of Osman and Orhan, the founders of the dynasty, is sacked by an army that includes the very Anatolian soldiers who had served Bayezid that morning in July. The symbolism is total. The dynasty's cradle is emptied. Timur then turns to the work he has planned for months. One by one, the Anatolian beyliks are formally restored. The princes who rode in his ranks now ride home. Germiyan receives its old territories. Saruhan, Aydin, Menteşe, each recovers its former domains. The Karamanid Emirate, the most powerful of the old beyliks and the most persistent Ottoman rival, is re-established with expanded borders. Timur is not acting from generosity. Each restored beylik becomes a buffer state, a fragment too small to challenge Samarkand, but large enough to prevent Ottoman reunification. The architecture is deliberate, a firebreak built from living polities. In late autumn, Timur marches to Smyrna, held by the Knights Hospitaller as a Christian outpost on the Aegean coast. The siege lasts roughly 2 weeks. Timurid engineers, veterans of campaigns from Delhi to Damascus, construct a mole into the harbour and breach the walls. The fortress falls in December of 1402. Its capture serves a dual purpose, demonstrating Timur's reach to the Mediterranean powers and eliminating a stronghold that no Anatolian beylik could have reduced alone. Across this landscape of restoration and destruction, the human cost accumulates in ways the chronicles record only in glimpses. Towns that resisted are punished. Populations are displaced. Trade routes that connected the Aegean to the interior are severed for years. The Timar system that Bayezid built to fund his cavalry collapses as estates are redistributed to restored beylik lords who owe nothing to the Ottoman house. The administrative machinery of a centralized state dissolves into a patchwork of competing sovereignties. Meanwhile, Bayezid remains in Timur's camp, carried eastward as the conqueror begins his withdrawal. The Spanish ambassador Clavijo, who visited Timur's court the following year, records that the Sultan was treated with a measure of dignity, permitted attendance and provisions appropriate to his rank. This is consistent with steppe political tradition, where a captured sovereign retained symbolic value alive. But captivity itself is the punishment. The man who styled himself the Thunderbolt, who had dictated terms to the kings of Europe after Nicopolis, who had squeezed Constantinople until its emperor begged for relief, now moves at another man's pace, in another man's direction. By the time winter settles over Anatolia, the Ottoman state exists only as a legal fiction. There is no functioning army, there is no central treasury, there is no agreed sovereign. Bayezid's sons have already begun to circle. Suleiman holds fragments of the European provinces. Isa claims Bursa briefly before being driven out. Mehmed, the youngest, operates from the eastern margins. Musa waits. Each prince commands a handful of loyal retainers and whatever local forces he can attract. The empire that had terrified Christendom and absorbed a dozen Turkish principalities has become a succession crisis with no mechanism for resolution. Timur departs Anatolia in the spring of 1403, his strategic objectives achieved. He has no interest in occupying the peninsula permanently. His empire stretches from the Ganges to the Mediterranean, and its coherence depends on his personal presence. Behind him, he leaves a shattered polity and a constellation of restored emirates whose gratitude will last exactly as long as his army remains within marching distance. The question now is not whether the Ottomans can recover, but whether any of Bayezid's sons possesses the patience and the ruthlessness to rebuild what their father's pride destroyed. The answer to that question arrives not as a single verdict, but as a decade of fratricide. 4 sons of Bayezid survive the catastrophe at Ankara, and each claims the Ottoman throne from a different corner of the wreckage. The empire does not simply fracture, it becomes 4 competing experiments in legitimacy, each testing whether a fragment can devour the others fast enough to reconstitute the whole. Suleiman, the eldest surviving prince, secures the European provinces. He reaches Edirne by the autumn of 1402, carrying the Ottoman treasury and the administrative apparatus of the Balkan domains. His position is the strongest on paper. He controls the richest provinces, the most established Timur system, and the loyalty of many frontier lords who have spent decades building their holdings in Thrace and Macedonia. He negotiates with Constantinople, with Venice, with Genoa, trading territorial concessions for diplomatic recognition. The Byzantines receive Thessaloniki and a strip of coastline. For the first time in years, the pressure on the ancient capital lifts entirely. Across the straits, Anatolia splinters further. Isa Çelebi seizes Bursa briefly, but his hold proves fragile. Mehmed, the youngest of the serious contenders, establishes himself at Amasya in the northeast, building a power base among the remaining loyal Anatolian cavalry and the frontier warriors of the Pontic region. He is perhaps 15 years old. What he lacks in resources he compensates with a quality none of his brothers possess in equal measure, a capacity for strategic patience that echoes the early Ottoman founders rather than their father's thunderbolt temperament. The first elimination comes swiftly. Mehmed defeats Isa in battle near Bursa in 1403, driving him into flight. Isa attempts to rally support among the restored Beyliks, but finds them unwilling to back a losing cause. He is killed by 1406, his brief candidacy leaving barely a trace in the chronicles. The contest narrows to 3, then to a strange triangular war. Musa Çelebi, initially a captive of Timur, is released and sent westward. Some sources suggest with Timurid encouragement to challenge Suleiman in the Balkans. Musa crosses into Europe around 1410, rallying discontented frontier warriors and Akancha raiders who resent Suleiman's concessions to Christian powers. His campaign is brutal and effective. Suleiman, whose authority has eroded through years of diplomatic compromise and court luxury in Edirne, finds his support collapsing. In 1411, Suleiman is overtaken while fleeing and killed near Edirne. Musa takes the European capital, but Musa's victory creates its own opposition. His harsh treatment of the Balkan aristocracy and his hostility toward Constantinople push the Byzantines into alliance with the one remaining brother. Emperor Manuel II provides ships to ferry Mehmed's forces across the straits. The irony is precise. The dynasty that had besieged Constantinople now depends on Byzantine goodwill to reunify. Mehmed crosses into Europe in 1413. The final battle takes place near Çamurlu in Serbia on the 17th of July, almost exactly 11 years after Ankara. Musa's army, weakened by defections from lords who calculate that Mehmed offers more stable rule, breaks in the field. Musa is captured and killed. Mehmed I enters Edirne as sole sultan. He is approximately 24 years old. The empire he inherits is smaller than the one his father commanded. The Anatolian Beyliks remain independent, the Balkans have contracted, the treasury is depleted. Yet the essential machinery survives. The Timur system still functions in the European provinces. The Janissary Corps, rebuilt from the survivors of Ankara and new recruits, provides a professional corps. The administrative traditions of the Divan endure. What Mehmed understands, and what his father never accepted, is that an empire rebuilt must be rebuilt carefully. He avoids major campaigns of reconquest. He negotiates with the Beyliks rather than demanding submission. He maintains the Byzantine alliance. The decade of civil war has taught the Ottoman state a lesson written in the ruin of Ankara, that power held through compulsion alone will shatter the moment compulsion fails. The slow work of reweaving loyalty, province by province, commander by commander, begins in the summer heat of 1413 in a palace that still bears the scars of fratricidal war. And so the slow, patient work of reconstruction begins to bear fruit. Mehmed I rules for 8 years, dying in 1421, leaving his son Murad II an empire that is smaller than the one Bayezid commanded, but infinitely more cohesive. The lesson of Ankara has been absorbed into the marrow of Ottoman statecraft. Murad consolidates rather than overreaches. He rebuilds the Timur system with care, binding Anatolian cavalry to the dynasty through land grants that create genuine investment rather than mere obedience. The Janissary Corps expands methodically, its recruitment through the Devshirme system producing soldiers whose loyalty belongs to the Sultan alone. The very fracture that destroyed Bayezid's army on that July afternoon, compelled men serving under banners they did not love, is systematically eliminated over 2 generations. Timur's empire follows the opposite trajectory. The conqueror dies in 1405, marching toward China, and his vast dominion fragments exactly as every steppe empire before it has fragmented. His sons and grandsons divide the inheritance. Samarkand remains magnificent, its turquoise domes and minarets testament to the wealth Timur extracted from 3 continents, but the political unity dissolves within a decade. The Timurid successor states produce scholars, astronomers, and poets of extraordinary brilliance, yet none commands the military force that shook the world at Ankara. The Beyliks Timur restored to independence are gradually reabsorbed by the Ottomans, this time with greater subtlety, their ruling families integrated into the imperial system rather than simply displaced. By 1453, the transformation is complete. Mehmed II, great-grandson of the Sultan who fell at Ankara, stands before the walls of Constantinople with an army of perhaps 80,000 and cannon that can hurl stone balls weighing over half a ton. The city that Bayezid besieged and Ankara's aftermath saved now faces an Ottoman state that has learned from catastrophe. The siege lasts 53 days. On the 29th of May, the walls that held for 1,000 years are breached. The empire Timur shattered has not merely survived, it has become something stronger than what existed before. The iron cage endures longer than any fortress. The legend that Timur displayed Bayezid in a barred cage, carrying the humiliated sultan as a trophy, appears nowhere in the earliest sources. Ruy González de Clavijo, the Castilian ambassador who visited Timur's court, records respectful treatment of the captive. Ibn Arabshah, writing decades later and hostile to Timur, mentions constraints but not a cage. The image crystallizes in European chronicles of the 15th and 16th centuries, fed by theatrical imagination and the irresistible drama of a thunderbolt caged. Christopher Marlowe places it on the London stage in 1587. By then the cage is more real than any document. The battlefield itself has largely vanished beneath the modern expansion of Ankara. The Chubuk stream still flows, though channeled now through suburban development. No monument marks where the Janissaries made their stand, or where the Anatolian contingents walked across the field toward their old banners. The plain where perhaps 225,000 men collided on a July morning is quiet, ordinary, indifferent to what it witnessed. Yet the echo persists in the structure of everything that followed. Ankara proved that an empire built on compulsion carries its own destruction within it, and that loyalty must be cultivated, not merely commanded. The Ottomans who emerged from the interregnum understood this truth in a way their founder's grandson never did. The state that Mehmed II wielded against Constantinople in 1453 was Bayezid's empire rebuilt by men who remembered why it broke. Thank you for joining this journey across 6 centuries of history, from the collision of 2 conquerors to the empire that rose from its own ruins. If these stories brought the past alive for you, consider subscribing so you never miss the next expedition into the decisive hours that shaped our world.